What happens when you multiply a bunch of numbers together, say 3 or 4? And what if several of them are negative? That's what we're going to look at today. We're going to simplify a bunch of numbers times themselves. Now, we've already looked at a negative times a negative times a positive. We've already looked at constants times variables and things like that. And we're going to put all those concepts together and kind of simplify it. A times b times c equals abc. It's going to get a little bit more complicated than that, but that's basically the gist of today's lesson. So let's go ahead and take a look at the first example. Simplify, does anybody remember what that means? That means to make short or as simple as possible. X, so some number x times negative 4. So I'm going to break it down to you into 5 easy steps. Step 1, we're going to move the constants to the front. Now, in this particular case, we're going to take the negative 4, because it's a constant, move it to the front. And when we do that, we end up with this. Negative 4x. Remember, x is a variable. It changes. It could be any number. Negative 4 is always negative 4, so we're going to put that out front. Why can we do that? Because of commutative property of multiplication. The order in which you multiply numbers does not matter. Second, we're going to determine, so step 2, determine the sign. Now we have a negative and a positive, so the sign is going to stay negative. So for this particular example, we don't have to do anything. But actually, a lot of times what you can do is you can circle how many negatives you have, and that will tell you your sign, which we'll get to in a further example. Next, we're going to multiply our constants. Now we only have one constant, so we don't actually have to multiply them. But again, you're going to see in a later example that if you have more than one constant, you want to multiply them together. Then again, for step 4, if you have more than one variable, you want to arrange them alphabetically. Again, this doesn't apply. Usually the first example is simpler, and sometimes in math you have a bunch of steps, and it's not that you skip it. You look at it. If it doesn't apply, you move on. Always have these steps in mind, though, as it gets more complicated. And step 5, which does apply, is to remove the multiplication signs. Remember, when we have a constant and a variable next to each other, that just means multiply, and therefore that's our answer. And therefore the answer to our original question is negative 4x. So therefore, let's restate the problem together and read the answer. X times negative 4 is equal to negative 4x, following those 5 simple steps. Let's read this one together. Simplify, make short. 4y. Now it's parentheses next, so that actually means multiply, right? Just as a refresher. 4y times negative x, parentheses again, so it's times negative 1/2. And if it confuses you, you can put the multiplication sign in between there. Let's follow these easy steps. So first thing we're going to do is move the constants out front. So notice that negative 1/2 is a constant. It's going to go up front with the 4. Doesn't matter if you put it before or after the 4. We'll go ahead and put it before. And therefore we end up with negative 1/2 times 4 times y times negative x. Now I put 4 and y in parentheses in the second step because they are being multiplied, and if it was wedged in between there without the parentheses, it would look weird. Not that you have to do that, but you kind of do, because otherwise it just wouldn't look right. So whenever you're multiplying and there's no parentheses or no multiplication sign, you have to put it there. So went ahead and moved my constant out front, which was the negative 1/2 and the 4. Now we're going to determine the sign. Now I said for this example you can circle how many negatives you have. I'm going to use a red pen this time. We have 1, 2 negatives. So somebody tell me, when you have 2 negatives, what does that make? Or even any even number of negatives. 2 negatives makes a positive, right? So therefore we know that the final sign of this particular problem is positive. Step 3, we're going to multiply our constants. So we have 1/2 times 4, which gives you 2. And that's it for that. I mean, it's simple, you know, you just multiply your constants together, not hard. Now is where we arrange alphabetically. I'm going to use orange this time. X comes before Y in the alphabet. And therefore, when we arrange this alphabetically, we're going to put x before y. Now, is this really necessary? I guess not, but I guess I've been doing math for so long that to me it just doesn't look right to put y before x. And actually, for practical reasons, when you're solving a problem, I don't know, I think it helps a lot of times to get the right answer to follow your work if you put it alphabetically. I don't know. It'd be hard to explain right now as to why I think that's true, but just take it from experience. I think it's more effective. And then finally, we're going to remove multiplication signs or parentheses, because when you have two things next to each other in parentheses, that means multiply. So we're going to remove that, and this is our final answer, 2xy. Let's read our original question together. 4y times negative x times negative 1/2 gives you negative, wait, that's not negative 2xy, it's positive 2xy. Let's put a positive sign out front, and I'll fix that later. Gives us positive 2xy, and you don't need the positive, you could just write 2xy without the positive, but anyway, I had to change that, so final answer, 2xy. Okay, let's read this one together. X times negative pi times negative 9 times negative a gives you what? And again, this is simplifying. So what goes in this box when we simplify it? Let's go ahead and follow these steps again together. We're going to move the constants out front. So we have a negative 9 that needs to go out front. And we also have to put the negative pi out front. Remember, e, I, and pi are all constant numbers. They need to go out front. And there's different lessons. In case you forgot what they mean, you can go back and look at those. But they are constants. So we're going to put them up front. Now, remember that 9 needs to go before pi. Anytime you have an e, and I, or pi, it acts as a variable, so the actual normal number, we call it, needs to go before the e, I, or pi. So we went ahead and did that step, and now we're going to count our negatives. Again, I told you could just circle them. We have 1, 2, 3. So when we determine our sign, 3 negatives make a negative, and that's it. Then it simplifies it down to just one particular sign. Okay, next, we're going to multiply our constants, and when we have negative 9 times pi, we can just go ahead and get the multiplication sign out of the way. We don't want to do 9 times 3.14 because 3.14 is not really equal to pi, but we can go ahead and just merge them together. If it was negative 9e, we'd write negative 9e. Negative 9 times I, we'd write negative 9i. So that's it for that step. Just multiplying our constants. Next up, we're going to arrange alphabetically, so that means a goes before x, just like in the alphabet. And then finally, we get rid of our multiplication signs. So this sign and this sign go away, and the final answer is negative 9 pi ax, as weird as that looks. So notice our constants come first, and then our variables come second, and something that's kind of halfway in between, which is pi. It's not a variable, but it looks like one. It goes in between the normal numbers, as we say, and the variables. So the answer to our original question is negative 9 pi ax. And again, sometimes it helps to read the question, but I've doodled so much I really can't mark anymore. Anyway, x times negative pi times negative 9 times negative a is equal to negative 9 pi ax once we simplify it or make it shorter. Let's go ahead and read this one together. Negative 8 times I times e times negative 2 gives you what number? Actually, I kind of doodled that wrong. What goes in this box? Okay. Again, let's go ahead and go through the steps. We're going to move the constants to the front. So guess what? Negative 2 is a constant, and so is negative 8. It doesn't matter where you put it. And guess what? I is also a constant. It's equal to the square root of negative 1. And guess what? So is e. So all of these numbers are actually constant. I didn't notice that when I made this up to begin with. But anyways, but you want to put the normal numbers, like negative 2, before the I and the e, which look like variables. So put these first, and then the I and the e. Now, how many negative signs do we have? We have 1, 2. An even number of negatives makes it positive, so that's step 2 out of the way. Step 3, multiply constants. What's 8 times 2? It is 16. Okay, and then next step is to arrange variables alphabetically. Now, these aren't variables, right? But we can treat them as such because they look like it, and really E should come before I. It just looks right, so we're going to put E before I, just like it comes before the alphabet. And finally, we are going to get rid of these multiplication signs because we don't need them, because we know that when numbers are next to letters or symbols, it means multiply. So the final answer is 16EI. So for the original question, negative 8 times I times E times negative 2, that's going to be equal to what? 16EI. Moving on. Let's read this problem together. Let's use yellowish this time. X times A times I times E. So we have a bunch of variables and constants represented by letters. Go ahead and move the constants out front. Now E and I are your constants. E is 2.718 blah 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 blah, and I is square root of negative 1. So they look like variables, but they're actually constants. Then we have the variables after that, X and A. Okay. Next we're going to determine the sign. This one's easy. There's no negatives, so we can just leave it the way it is. Then we're going to multiply our constants together, so it just gives us EI. Then we're going to arrange the letters alphabetically, or variables. So A comes before X. And then we can just remove the multiplication sign. Final answer, EIAX. Now I don't know if you'll ever see that in math, but it's just a good example to follow to get good at arranging these and multiplying these and simplifying these more efficiently. Did this one for a reason. You'll notice there's no steps, and you'll find out why real quick. 2 times x times pi times 0 gives you what? Now, do you guys remember in a previous lesson, if you multiply anything by 0, no matter how complicated it is, the answer is what? It's 0, right? So, yes, you could go through the steps of moving the constants out front and all that, but sometimes in math, when two lessons collide, it's better to just follow the easier step. And in this case, anything times 0, anything times 0 gives you 0. So all this mess right here, let's use a different color. All this mess times here, once you multiply by 0, it gives you 0. So yeah, I know you might be thinking, well, why can't I do it the other way? You can, it just takes longer. Alright, final example for now. Might add some more later. Square root of 2, is that a constant or a variable? It's constant, right? It's not a rational number, but it is constant. Square root of 2 times negative x, some number negative x times 3 times negative a. If we simplify that, what do we get? Okay, first of all, we're going to move the 3 out front, and you want to put whole numbers or rational numbers before square roots. It just looks better, okay? Square root of 2 and then 3 just doesn't look right, and you could read it as square root of 23 if you're not careful. So put the whole number first. Okay, that's part of the reason why I did this example. We do move the constant to the front, and we move the whole numbers to the very front, and then the square roots. Now let's go ahead and count the negatives together. We'll circle them. We have 2 negatives, and that's going to make a positive for step 2. Then when we multiply, different color, we multiply 3 times square root of 2, we just get 3 square root of 2. Again, when you have a number next to a radical, that means multiply. You don't actually need this multiplication sign. So there you go. So that was step 3, multiplying constants. Step 4, a becomes before x, so we're going to put it before x. And step 5, we can go ahead and get rid of these multiplication signs. So we can have 3 square root of 2 ax, which looks a little weird, but something like that might come up time to time. Let's read this question one more time together and then show the answer. Square root of 2 times negative x times 3 times negative a. We ended up with 3 square root of 2 ax. Alright, it's going to do it for this lesson for now. This lesson is titled Simplifying Numbers Times Numbers. And basically it's just moving the constants out front, making sure you have the right sign, multiplying your constants together, arranging the variables alphabetically, and removing these multiplication signs.